Did you know that for 5 years now, ever since the release of Minecraft 1.14.2, there has existed a strange but hidden exploit that allowed you to sprint in multiple directions and move at high speeds you shouldn't normally be able to. And if you use specific versions of the game, you can use this exploit on big Minecraft servers like Hypixel or any big public SMP to gain a competitive advantage. Did you also know that one of Minecraft's most useful bugs, working for over 5.5 years, is about to be patched in an upcoming version and players aren't happy? Today we talk about some of the most interesting exploits with Minecraft sprinting, how some became core features of the game, and how others were too overpowered to leave working. Sprinting was first added to Minecraft way back in 2011 during Minecraft Beta 1.8 and has since had quite the history of bugs and unique mechanics. Some of Minecraft's earliest bug reports are related to sprinting, such as this one here outlining how players could occasionally sprint over 1-block gaps. This happens rarely, but is relatively easy to reproduce, and interestingly, despite being reported as a bug 12 years ago, is actually now considered intended behavior. This isn't uncommon either. Many of these sprinting bugs became game mechanics or were left as intended behavior. One of the most famous examples is sprint resetting. If you didn't know, when you sprint and attack an entity, your very first attack will deal much more knockback than following attacks, provided you remain sprinting. This mechanic became core to PvP, especially 1.8 PvP, where techniques such as sprint resetting, where you hit your opponent once to do increased knockback, then stop sprinting and start sprinting again so you can do increased knockback once more, allowed you to get players in long combos. However, what's interesting about sprint resetting is that in older versions of the game, it didn't work. In older Minecraft, you could only sprint by tapping the W key twice in rapid succession. You couldn't rebind sprint or click control to do so. And in these versions, if you started sprinting and then hit an entity, your sprint would be immediately cancelled and stopped. However, in Minecraft 1.7.2, where a dedicated sprint button was added, for some reason, if you use that button to sprint instead of tapping W twice, your sprint would not be cancelled upon hitting an entity. Tapping W twice and then hitting a mob would still stop your sprint though. This issue became a known bug and was reported over 10 years ago. The player was still sprinting after hitting an entity despite not being supposed to, which led to the server, or in the case of single player, the internal server, believing that the player was no longer in sprint state, meaning the knockback they did on consecutive attacks was calculated as if the player wasn't sprinting at all. This happens because, as mentioned, the server believed the player is no longer sprinting, and since knockback distance is calculated server-side, the server thus applies a non-sprinting knockback distance to consecutive attacks. This bug also led to some other unintended consequences. For example, players performing critical attacks while sprinting. To perform a critical attack, you have to be in a falling state, and you know you've done a critical if these particles appear. If you used W twice to sprint and then did a crit, your sprint is cancelled. But if you held control to sprint, because your sprint isn't cancelled, you can continue doing crits while sprinting and jumping. And here's another cool unintended behavior of this bug. As you all know, sprinting reduces more hunger than walking. But if you start sprinting, hit any entity and then continue sprinting without stopping, because the server thinks you aren't sprinting anymore, your hunger decreases much slower, at the same speed as if you were walking. This allows you to use a lot less hunger, of course, and thus eat less food. This exploit is niche but still has some good uses. For example, it's particularly good on anarchy servers like 2b2t, where you need to escape spawn and food is scarce, and it also may be useful in speedruns where eating slows you down. So why am I telling you all this? Well, that's because whilst clearly at first this was unintended behavior, the ability to remain sprinting whilst in combat was greatly enjoyed by the wider Minecraft community, and as such effectively became a feature of the game. Even in the most modern Minecraft versions where the PvP system has now entirely changed, if you tap W twice to sprint and hit a mob, your sprint is cancelled. But if you sprint using a dedicated button, it remains. There is even supposedly official word from Jeb mentioning that sprint resetting will remain. Now, things get more interesting when we look at sprint exploits that allowed you to do things you aren't meant to be able to do. Many of you may not know that for the longest time, if you entered a boat and hit the sprint key, your FOV would change as if you were sprinting, but you in fact were not going any faster. This happened with basically every rideable entity as well. You could sprint whilst in them or riding them, but your speed wouldn't actually change. And interestingly, there was a unique bug with this that appeared in 1.14 14.2. If you entered a boat or began riding another entity, started sprinting, then dismounted from the entity, your sprint would now be permanently enabled. Let me show you. I get in a boat, start sprinting, leave the boat, and notice how I'm moving faster, and my FOV didn't change back. It's hard to see at first, but you can tell by the sound of the grass that I'm in sprint mode. I'm no longer holding the sprint key, by the way. So now that I'm in this state of permanent sprint, what's interesting is that I can actually sprint sideways. Normally you can't sprint sideways, the best you can do is diagonal like this. However, using this bug, I can move completely sideways whilst in sprint mode. The normal left and right movement speed is 4.317 blocks per second, the same speed as just walking. However, using this bug, I can move sideways at 5.612 blocks per second, which is the same as the normal sprint speed. And guess what? You get the exact same speed buff for going backwards. Oh, and another small trick. Moving diagonally or at a 45-degree angle by holding either A or D and then either W or S actually allows you to move even faster. So now we are moving backwards and sideways at a speed even faster than normal straight sprinting. You can stop moving entirely, open up the chat, open up GUIs, sneak in all directions. Open up your internet browser, go to YouTube and subscribe to TheMisterEpic so we can reach 750k subs by the end of the year, no pressure, and you will still remain in this bugged sprint state as long as you don't hit the sprint button again, which if you do will reset you back to normal and reduce your FOV. So that's awesome, right? Permanent sprint, sideways and backward sprint. There's no downsides to this bug at all, well except for one thing. Sprint jumping will not work properly. You'll notice that while I'm in this bugged infinite sprint state, jumping does not propel me forward. My jump distance is the same as if I was just walking. I'm pretty sure this also once again occurs because the server thinks you aren't in sprint mode. So what are some other cool behaviors with this exploit? Well, first of all, this bug does in fact work with speed potions. Normally with speed 2, you can move sideways and backwards at a speed of 6.044 blocks per second, and sprinting with speed 2 allows you to move at a speed of 7.857 blocks per second. Using speed 2 and this bug allows you to move sideways and backwards at 7.857 blocks per second, and if you go 45 degrees backwards, you can break the 8 blocks per second speed mark. It's kind of trippy moving this fast whilst going backwards, that's for sure. Now, what's interesting is that whilst this bug where the FOV changes when riding entities has existed for quite some time, the infinite sprint exploit didn't come into effect until Minecraft 1.14.2, released back in early 2019. So, what happened? Well, small YouTuber Hepe theorizes that it has something to do with this bug here in 1.14.2 pre-release 3, where the player not being able to swim while sneaking was fixed. Regardless, the infinite sprint bug remained all the way up until Minecraft 1.19.3, released in late 2022, affecting 2.5 years worth of Minecraft versions. And even better, you can still use it to get a competitive advantage on most Minecraft servers. Many Minecraft servers these days, despite being on newer versions of the game, will support older clients connecting. So, for example, here I am on my Minecraft SMP og-network.net, which is on 1.20.4, but I'm using a 1.19.2 version of Minecraft, and I can perform this exploit and enter infinite sprint mode, despite the server being on a version where the exploit is patched. Thus, I now have a competitive advantage over all other players on the server, which is useful since PvP is enabled and griefing is allowed. This also works in reverse, where you can join 1.8 servers and perform this exploit. For example, if I go to my server's hub, which is on Minecraft 1.8, on my 1.19.2 client, I can once again perform the exploit. This means it would work on Hypixel or other 1.8 PvP servers where the exploit didn't even exist yet, giving you competitive advantages there too. So, while the infinite sprint exploit is useful, it is patched on newer versions of the game. But there is one final exploit with sprinting that is still unpatched to this day. If you sprint and then enter a state where you are meant to be slowed, for example holding a shield, crawling, eating, or most importantly sneaking, you will actually move faster than you should be able to. Here I am normally sneaking at 1.294 blocks per second, and here I am sneaking after sprinting at 1.682 blocks per second. Surprise, surprise, this bug was also introduced in the exact same version the prior infinite sprint bug was, 1.14.2, specifically 1.14.2 pre-release 3, and ever since then I've used it a lot. Now, you might be thinking thinking, this doesn't really seem useful like the infinite sprint bug because we are still moving so slow, but its usefulness becomes evident when you consider a few other factors. For example, sneak jumping. As you can see, normal sneak jumping is shockingly slow, but if I sprint sneak jump, I move much faster, the same speed as walk jumping. And this is very useful because it allows you to bypass the slow sneak movement speed downside. This exploit becomes even more powerful if you add Swift Sneak 3 to your armor, an enchantment added in 1.19. I mean, look at this. We are almost moving at normal sprint jump speed whilst in sneak mode. And the great thing about this exploit is that unlike the infinite sprint exploit, which requires a specific setup and has the downside of not letting you sprint jump, there is absolutely zero downsides to sprint sneaking. You slap Swift Sneak on your leggings, which you'll always be wearing anyways, and boom, you can use it whenever you want. With Swift Sneak 3, you can sprint at almost the same speed as walking, and can sprint sneak jump at almost the same speed as normal sprint jumping. These sprint sneak exploits are very useful if you are building high up and you need to sneak. They are very useful for bridging, very useful on competitive servers where you may need to hide your name tag, for example if your base is being raided, but most importantly, these exploits are super useful in ancient cities where you can sprint sneak jump around and not have to worry about triggering the warden. There are zero downsides to this exploit and is generally liked and regularly used by the small number of people like myself who accidentally came across it. It's basically muscle memory for me to sprint sneak and sprint sneak jump now. That being said, in Minecraft 1.21.4, Snapshot 24W44A, a snapshot which released only about 2 weeks ago now, this exploit was patched. While we haven't got a full release with this patch yet, it means that very soon, sprint sneaking and all other forms of sprinting while slowed will no longer be possible. Due to how harmless the bug is, how long it's existed in the game, that being 5.5 years by the way, and since so many players have gotten used to using it, players are not happy about this, some of which complaining and asking for the bug to be unfixed, mentioning that fixing the bug has made the game feel more sluggish and slow. Did this bug really have to be fixed? Earlier in the video I told you about the sprint resetting bug and how after being left in the game for years, it eventually became a de facto game mechanic because it made the game a more enjoyable experience, making Minecraft feel smoother, especially during combat. The sprint sneak bug is the same in that regard. It made the game feel smoother and more enjoyable, yet after years they decided to patch it. I think the addition of Swift Sneak and Ancient Cities were a leading factor in that decision, but guess we will never know. Regardless, use this exploit while you still can. I hope you all enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe, thank you all so much for watching.